Immediately following the FBI's unprecedented raid on former President Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago, the Biden administration claimed they had no prior knowledge of this extraordinary event. You'll remember their first announcement was that they learned about it on Twitter, and then here's Karine Jean-Pierre at a White House briefing expanding on their lack of knowledge.
And then you've said repeatedly that the president learned of the news of the FBI visit to Mar-a-Lago the other day through news reports. Can you tell us anything more? Was he watching the news? Was he scrolling Twitter? Did someone in his staff flag it for him?
I can tell you this: he was not aware of the was it the Mar-a-Lago raid? I don't know what you guys are calling it before it happened. So I can tell you that did not know. He learned about it really like all of us did. I'm sure maybe someone on his team flagged it for him, but he was not aware. What I can tell you definitively and for sure, he was not aware of this. Nobody in the White House was. We were not given a heads up, and we did not know about what happened yesterday.
Now, at the time, that didn't seem plausible. I mean, at the very least, you would think that the White House would get a heads up from the Justice Department and the FBI before such an extraordinary event. And now, thanks to investigative reporter John Solomon, we're actually learning quite a bit more about what the president, Biden, knew about this investigation before it happened. In fact, we're learning that the Biden administration may have had a hand in instigating this investigation in the first place. According to the report at justthenews.com, Solomon inspected documents related to the investigation, and his findings show then White House Deputy Counsel Jonathan Su was engaged in conversations with the FBI, DOJ, and National Archives as early as April, shortly after 15 boxes of classified and other materials were voluntarily returned to the Federal Historical Agency from Trump's Florida home. Now let's just pause there for just a moment, because already we're seeing a picture that's very different than we're learning from the strategic leaks anonymously from the Justice Department that make their way into the corporate-run propaganda media. First off, those 15 boxes that were turned over by Trump, or his team more accurately, from Mar-a-Lago. Where'd those boxes come from? Do people really think that Donald Trump was down in the basement of the White House packing cardboard boxes before he left the White House? Of course not. In the federal government, there's an organization called the General Services Administration, the GSA. They're responsible for tasks like this. They pack documents into boxes, they load the boxes onto trucks or airplanes, and they ship them to the president's new home. That's what happened in this case. And after the fact, the National Archive is requesting some of those boxes be returned for one reason or another. And what we're seeing right here in this report is that process taking place. In April, there were 15 boxes that had been returned earlier in the year, and they were reviewing the contents of those boxes. So why did the Biden administration's White House counsel have to get involved? And more importantly, what did they do? Well, let's get back to Solomon's report. By May, Su conveyed to the archives that President Joe Biden would not object to waiving his predecessor's claims to executive privilege, a decision that opened the door for the Justice Department to get a grand jury to issue a subpoena compelling Trump to turn over any remaining materials he possessed from his presidency. That move right there actually began the criminal investigation into President Trump, and it was at the direction and instigation of the Biden administration itself. Now, two things that you need to bear in mind. First, obviously, the Biden White House did not just learn of this thing after the raid in Mar-a-Lago. They were involved with it months before the actual raid. But secondly, and more importantly, this whole idea of waiving executive privilege. President Biden waived the executive privilege that was President Trump's before it was his. Executive privilege is something that goes back all the way to our first president, George Washington, who first claimed it during his dealings with Congress back in the late 18th century. One president holds on to that executive privilege from each president before him and for each president after him. President Biden now, for the second time, has waived executive privilege that had been held by not just President Trump, but all of his predecessors. First for the January 6th committee, and now for this raid on Mar-a-Lago. This is a very dangerous development and will affect every president after him. But it's all in the spirit of trying to get Donald Trump. And that's how they've rationalized it. It also conjures up some interesting images. I think there's a lot of documents that Barack Obama might be sitting on right now, related to Fast and Furious, related to the IRS investigations to conservative groups, related to Benghazi. They've protected those documents under executive privilege. Well, maybe it's time to relook at those documents now that Joe Biden has waived certain levels of executive privilege over those documents. What are the key takeaways here? Well, the Biden administration lied when they said that they knew nothing about the investigation into President Trump and the impending raid on Mar-a-Lago. They were actually involved with it months before the raid happened. Number two, they actually instigated the investigation by, number three, waiving President Trump's executive privilege over those documents. By the way, President Trump, he's on the offensive on this thing. He filed a civil rights lawsuit against the Justice Department, claiming that his Fourth Amendment rights had been violated. Only a couple of things we can take away right now, since this is a developing story. Number one, pretty much impossible to trust the Biden White House with anything they say about this thing. Number two, Merrick Garland probably should have recused himself from anything involving President Trump, considering Trump's the man that kept him off the Supreme Court, and let's face it, Garland seems like an angry little man with a score to settle. Number three, hard to trust the FBI in all of this since they keep leaking stuff anonymously and illegally to the media. And number four, well, since Trump has now filed a lawsuit, things are developing at a rapid pace and it's going to get even more interesting. One thing's for certain, if you want the latest on all of this and more with all the analysis you deserve, keep turning to townhall.com.